Hi all, this is Pastor Tim here at Grace of God, Long Island. Thanks for following our sermon podcast feed. What you're listening to right now is the second of an occasional series you'll find in this feed, which I'm calling Deleted Scenes. Just like when a movie or TV show is being made, it occasionally happens as I'm writing a sermon that it just goes too long and something needs cutting. Now generally that's because I let myself just kind of go on and the trim material isn't worth it. However, sometimes I find myself cutting something that I think would have some value in saying, but it just doesn't flow well into the rest of the sermon, or it simply ends up too long. When I have a piece that I think meets that standard, you'll find it in this feed on Tuesdays as a deleted scene. Today's deleted scene comes from Sunday's message on Mark 7. If you didn't listen to that, it might be worth pausing here, going to that episode in the feed, and listening before you get here. And then I would also recommend reading Mark 7, the first 13 verses. In worship on Sunday, I took time to talk about the various traditions which make up our worship service. We talked about the meaning and purpose of those traditions. We did that because Jesus has some important teachings about traditions in Mark 7 for us to consider. And again, if you haven't read that yet, please pause this and go quick, read Mark 7, 1-13. Now, to be clear, Jesus in this section is not primarily talking about believers functioning as and in the church. That's an application of his teaching here, which I made in the sermon. But what Jesus has to say here is applicable to every person as they seek to be justified before God. And whether they admit it or not, everyone who believes that they should do good in life wants justification before God. This is true for believers also. Every person ever born has an innate desire for justification. We want to be viewed as good and acceptable by God. That's why the Pharisees had these traditions about hand washing that we read in Mark 7. It wasn't a hygiene thing. This was their justification. They followed these rules, and that was what showed everyone that they were good, that they were justified. Today, as you're on social media especially, I want you to put on justification glasses. As you see everyone's posts, as you look at your own posts, if you're feeling really brave, I think you should go and check out your own profile. Go on social media and watch people try and self-justify. Again, this isn't something that just everyone else does. Go check out your own profile. I've done this for myself. It's not pretty. It didn't make me feel great. We are always, constantly, trying to prove that we are good and deserve salvation. Sometimes people call this virtue signaling, right? We post about who we voted for, who we didn't vote for. We post cryptic, passive-aggressive notes about someone else so that everyone else can know we are innocent and aggrieved in some way. We put on this big show, like the Pharisees and their hand-washing, to prove our own justification. In spite of that all, God saves us. In spite of our own fervent attempts to self-justify, to convince Him, to convince the world, to convince ourselves that we deserve life and not death, God gives us justification as a free gift through Jesus, His Son. Your baptism drowns you to death, Paul in Romans 6 tells us, and then raises you to forgiveness and new life in Jesus. All of those attempts at self-justification drowned away, replaced by faith in Jesus, who guarantees your salvation on the basis of His justified status. That's a message you can share with a world that needs to hear it. That's our sermon deleted scene for today. Music is What Words Can't Describe by Vlad Gluschenko at soundcloud.com/VGL9. Thanks again for listening. Please share our podcast feed with others and share with them the peace that you have in your justification through Jesus. I'm Pastor Tim Walsh at Grace of God in Dix Hills, 510 Deer Park, just north off LIE exit 51. Join us on Sundays at 9:30 a.m. God bless and keep you this week.